Ella sat in her dimly lit room, nestled under a thick blanket as rain tapped rhythmically against her window. The sound was comforting, a natural symphony that lulled her into a false sense of security. The flickering light of the television cast shadows that danced across the walls, enhancing the eerie atmosphere as she watched an old horror film. It was supposed to be a typical Friday night alone, a chance to unwind after a hectic week. Her parents were out of town, and she relished the solitude. The house was hers, a sanctuary where she could escape into her favorite films without interruption. As Ella reached for the popcorn, a sudden noise from downstairs broke through the movie's chilling soundtrack. She paused, listening intently, her heart beginning to race. The sound was subtle but unmistakable, like a door creaking open or the soft shuffling of footsteps. She muted the television, holding her breath as she strained to hear. The rain continued to fall steadily, and for a moment she wondered if she had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, a deliberate thud, as if something heavy had been moved. Ella's mind raced, trying to rationalize the noise. Perhaps it was the wind, she thought, or the old house settling. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to call someone, but decided against it. She was an adult, and this was probably nothing. Clutching her blanket for comfort, she returned to her movie, though her eyes frequently darted to the doorway, half expecting to see a shadow lurking there. Minutes passed in tense silence before the noise returned, now accompanied by the distinct sound of glass breaking. A jolt of fear shot through her. This was no longer something she could dismiss. Her instincts screamed at her to get out, to run, but curiosity kept her rooted in place. She needed to know what was happening in her home. Summoning her courage, Ella stood and tiptoed to her bedroom door. She opened it cautiously, peering into the dark hallway. The house felt different now, charged with a menacing energy that made her skin crawl. The staircase loomed before her, descending into darkness. She hesitated, every instinct urging her to retreat, but something pulled her forward. With each step, the floorboards creaked ominously under her weight, and she winced at the noise, fearing it might give her away. As she reached the bottom, the air grew colder, and the hair on her arms stood on end. She could see the living room ahead, dimly lit by the streetlights filtering through the curtains. Everything seemed in order, but a sense of dread hung heavily in the air. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes scanning the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat that matched her quickening breath. Suddenly, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of movement, a fleeting shadow slipping past the kitchen door. Ella froze, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it a burglar? An animal? Or something far worse? Panic began to set in, and she turned to retreat up the stairs, but a creak behind her stopped her cold. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror, expecting to come face to face with whatever had invaded her home. Instead, she saw only the darkened hallway, stretching out before her like a yawning chasm. Her imagination conjured up horrors lurking just beyond the shadows. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her so badly that she nearly dropped it. With shaking hands, she pulled it out, the bright screen illuminating her face. It was a text from an unknown number, the words sending a chill down her spine. "I can see you." Her heart skipped a beat as she looked around, feeling exposed and vulnerable. She had to get out, find safety, but the thought of passing the kitchen, where the shadow had vanished, filled her with dread. She moved cautiously, keeping her back to the wall as she edged towards the front door. Her fingers fumbled with a lock, desperate to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. It was jammed, as if something on the other side was holding it closed. Panic surged through her veins, and she turned, ready to flee through the back door in the kitchen, when another text arrived. "Don't run, Ella." Her blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they knew her name. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and tears stung her eyes as fear overwhelmed her. She needed to hide, to find a place where she could regroup and call for help. Her mind raced as she crept back down the hallway, searching for a safe haven. The closet under the stairs loomed ahead, a dark refuge that promised temporary safety. She slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her. Inside the cramped space, she struggled to calm her breathing, listening intently for any signs of movement. Her phone screen cast a faint glow, enough to illuminate the narrow confines of the closet. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers, her heart pounding in her ears as she pressed the phone to her ear. The line rang, each tone a torturous eternity. Finally, an operator's voice crackled to life, a beacon of hope in her desperate situation. Ella whispered her address, her voice barely audible as she explained her predicament. "Stay calm, help is on the way," the operator assured her, but the words offered little comfort. She was alone, trapped in her own home, and whoever was out there knew exactly where she was. Minutes dragged on, each one an eternity as she waited, every creak of the house a potential threat. Her mind conjured images of the intruder, lurking just outside the closet, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The sound of sirens in the distance was a sweet relief, but as they grew closer, another sound reached her ears, a soft, mocking laughter echoing through the hallway. It was a chilling reminder that her tormentor was still out there, playing a twisted game of cat and mouse. The police arrived, their presence a lifeline she clung to desperately. She heard their voices calling out, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the closet. A hand grasped the doorknob and she held her breath, praying it was someone there to help her. The door swung open, revealing a police officer, his expression one of concern. Ella stumbled out, her body trembling with relief and fear. She was safe, for the moment, but the nightmare was far from over. As she recounted her story to the officers, she noticed something odd. The glass she had heard breaking was untouched, the house undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. It was as if her ordeal had been a figment of her imagination. But the texts on her phone were real, undeniable proof that she hadn't imagined the terror of the night. The officers promised to investigate, but as they searched the house, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if the intruder was someone she knew? The investigation revealed no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone having been in the house. The texts were traced to a disposable phone, untraceable and anonymous. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air, leaving only fear and uncertainty in their wake. Ella tried to return to normal life, but the events of that night haunted her. Every creak of the house, every shadow that flickered in the corner of her eye, sent her heart racing with fear. She was a prisoner in her own home, trapped by the memory of a night she couldn't escape. Desperate for answers, she called her parents, hoping they might have some insight or advice. Her mother answered, concern lacing her voice as Ella explained everything that had happened. But their trip out of town meant they couldn't return until the following day. Her father reassured her, promising they'd be back as soon as they could. Until then, she'd have to rely on the increased police patrol in the area. Ella found herself alone once more, her nerves frayed by exhaustion and fear. The police had come and gone, their presence a temporary balm for her anxiety. She double-checked every lock, ensuring the house was secure, but a lingering unease gnawed at her. Finally, she climbed into bed, her body tense and alert. Her mind wouldn't let her relax, replaying the events of the night over and over. She lay there in the darkness, the rain tapping against the window, a haunting reminder of her isolation. Then, just as she was beginning to drift into a restless sleep, her phone buzzed again. She felt a jolt of fear as she picked it up, the screen glowing ominously in the darkness. Another message from the unknown number. Those are some nice blue shorts you're wearing." Her heart stopped. The intruder was watching her, even now. She glanced down at her pajamas, confirming the truth of the message. She stifled a scream, terror gripping her like a vice. She couldn't stay there, couldn't wait for help to arrive. Her only chance was to escape, to get out of the house before it was too late. Ella's mind raced as she considered her options, her gaze landing on the window. It was a desperate move, but she saw no other choice. She didn't have the courage to face the front door, knowing it might be watched. Her hands shook as she opened the window, the cool night air rushing in to meet her. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the ground slick and treacherous below. Ella hesitated, fear and uncertainty warring within her. Taking a deep breath, Ella climbed through the window, her heart racing with adrenaline. She carefully lowered herself to the ground, her feet landing softly in the wet grass of the backyard. The rain had turned the yard into a slippery mire, and she nearly lost her balance, but managed to steady herself. She darted behind a large oak tree, its gnarled branches offering a bit of cover from the streetlights that cast a pale glow across the yard. The house loomed behind her, dark and silent, its once comforting presence now a source of fear. Ella reached for her phone again, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The line rang and rang, each second feeling like an eternity. When the operator finally answered, she could barely get her words out through her panicked breathing. "Help, please. I'm outside. The intruder is still in the house, and they're sending me messages. I need help now." The operator's voice was calm, attempting to reassure her, but Ella could barely focus on the words. Her eyes darted around the yard, every rustle of the leaves and distant sound magnified by her fear. "Stay where you are. Officers are on their way," the operator said. "Can you stay hidden until they arrive?" Ella nodded, though the operator couldn't see her. She crouched lower, pressing herself against the tree, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. The rain began to pick up again, the droplets soaking through her clothes and making her shiver. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Ella's muscles ached from the cold and the uncomfortable position. Every noise made her flinch, branches snapping, the distant sound of cars passing, the persistent tapping of rain on the grass. Finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night. Ella's relief was palpable, and she struggled to stay still, not wanting to attract any unwanted attention. The police lights flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. 2 officers approached, their flashlights sweeping across the yard. Ella waited, holding her breath, as they drew nearer. She finally called out to them, her voice shaky and strained. "Over here, I'm by the oak tree." The officers quickly made their way to her, their expressions serious as they took in the scene. They helped Ella up. One officer stayed with her while the other returned to the house to investigate. Ella's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts as she sat on the damp grass. The police were searching the house again, their flashlights moving through the rooms as they conducted a thorough sweep. Every minute felt like a lifetime. After what seemed like an eternity, the officer returned, his face grim. "The house is clear," he said. "We didn't find anyone, but we'll keep an increased patrol in the area. We recommend you stay with a neighbor or find somewhere safe until your parents return." Ella nodded, her mind still reeling. She thanked the officer, her voice barely a whisper. The officer left, promising to check back in on her later. She was alone once more, the oppressive silence of the night returning. She tried to make her way to a neighbor's house, but the fear and exhaustion had taken their toll. Her legs felt weak, and her steps were unsteady. She was almost to the neighbor's front porch when her phone buzzed again. The message was short and chilling. "I'm still watching." Her blood ran cold. The terror that had seemed to subside surged back with renewed intensity. She hurriedly knocked on the neighbor's door, the sound loud and urgent. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a concerned face. The neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, ushered her inside. Ella collapsed into a chair, her breathing ragged and her eyes wild. Mrs. Thompson immediately called the police to inform them of Ella's arrival. The police arrived shortly thereafter, checking in on her and updating her on their progress. They assured her that they were doing everything they could, but the reality of the situation was grim. The intruder had managed to evade capture, and there were no leads on their identity. Ella spent the rest of the night in a daze, her thoughts a chaotic mess of fear and anxiety. Mrs. Thompson offered her a spare room to rest in, and Ella gratefully accepted, though sleep came fitfully and filled with nightmares. The next morning, her parents arrived, their faces etched with worry and relief. They comforted her, their presence a balm to her frayed nerves. They immediately contacted the police for an update and began discussing their options for enhancing security at home. The police continued their investigation, but as the days passed, the case grew colder. There were no further messages, no new evidence, just the lingering fear that someone had been watching her every move. Ella and her parents worked with a security company to install cameras and alarms throughout the house. The once comforting home was now filled with surveillance equipment, a constant reminder of the terror she had endured. The days following the terrifying night had been fraught with fear and uncertainty for Ella. Though her parents had returned and the house was fortified with security measures, the sense of safety she once felt had evaporated. Each creak of the house, each shadow in the corner of her vision, reignited the terror of that fateful night. Ella tried to resume a normal routine, but the anxiety gnawed at her constantly. Her nights were restless, plagued by nightmares of the intruder, and her days were spent in a heightened state of alertness. The fear became almost a physical presence, and she found herself jumping at every unexpected noise. One late afternoon, as the rain began to patter against the windows once more, Ella decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The neighborhood had begun to feel like a cage, its familiar streets now a reminder of her vulnerability. As she stepped out into the drizzle, she felt the cool air on her skin, a temporary relief from the stifling atmosphere of her home. The walk helped, albeit briefly. When she returned, the house was quiet. The security system's reassuring beeps a reminder of her vigilant precautions. She locked the door behind her and went to the kitchen to make some tea. As she waited for the kettle to boil, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the same unknown number. "Nice to see you out and about." Her blood ran cold. The intruder had been watching her, even now. Panic surged through her, and she stumbled backward, nearly dropping her phone. She quickly dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to explain her situation. The operator's calm voice reassured her that officers would be sent to check the house, but Ella's fear only deepened. Just as she hung up, a loud bang echoed through the house, coming from the basement. The sound was unmistakable, a heavy thud, followed by a dragging noise. Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that someone was in the house. Terror-stricken, she grabbed her phone and headed toward the basement door. The house was eerily silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. She descended the stairs cautiously, each step a jarring reminder of the danger she faced. The basement was dimly lit, the weak light barely penetrating the gloom. Ella crept forward, her breath coming in shallow, rapid gasps. The basement was a labyrinth of old furniture and boxes, and she moved carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. As she rounded a corner, she saw him, a dark figure, partially obscured by the shadows, working on something she couldn't quite make out. The intruder turned, his face partially illuminated by the dim light. His eyes gleamed with a twisted satisfaction as he saw her. Ella's instinct was to run, but he was quicker, lunging toward her with surprising speed. She sprinted back up the stairs, her heart racing with terror. The intruder's footsteps pounded behind her, the sound growing louder with each passing second. She burst through the basement door and slammed it shut behind her, but the intruder was relentless. The door shuttered under his assault, and she knew it wouldn't hold for long. In a frantic bid to escape, Ella grabbed her phone and ran through the house, her mind a chaotic blur of fear and desperation. She reached the front door, but it was locked tight. She fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling so badly that she could barely fit them into the lock. The door finally swung open, and she dashed outside, rain pelting her face as she ran toward the backyard. She knew she couldn't stay in the open. The intruder would easily catch her. Her only chance was to find a place to hide. She darted behind the oak tree, the rain soaking her to the bone. Her breathing was ragged, her heart pounding as she scanned the yard for any sign of the intruder. She crouched low, trying to remain as silent as possible, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The intruder's voice rang out, distorted by the rain. "You can't run forever, Ella. You're mine." His words were chilling, a grim reminder of the peril she faced. Ella stayed hidden, her mind racing with potential escape plans. She noticed a small, unused shed at the edge of the yard. It was a long shot, but it might provide some cover. As the intruder's footsteps grew closer, she made a break for it, slipping into the shed and closing the door behind her. Inside, the shed was dark and musty, filled with old gardening tools and discarded equipment. Ella huddled in the corner, her heart racing as she listened to the intruder's movements outside. The shed creaked and groaned in the wind, making her feel even more exposed. Her phone buzzed again, and she checked it with trembling hands. Another message, "I know where you are." Her blood ran cold. The intruder was closing in on her location, and she had to act fast. Ella looked around the shed, desperately searching for something she could use to defend herself. She found an old rake and a pair of gardening shears, and though they were hardly weapons, they were better than nothing. She gripped them tightly, ready to use them if necessary. The intruder's footsteps grew louder, and Ella could hear him trying the shed door. Her breath caught in her throat as she prepared for the worst. The door rattled as he attempted to force it open, but the old lock held. Then, with a sudden crash, the door was ripped off its hinges. The intruder stood there, his face illuminated by the dim light outside. Ella felt a surge of panic but held her ground, brandishing the rake and shears. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice shaky but determined. The intruder chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You really think you can stop me with that?" He advanced toward her, and Ella swung the rake with all her might. He dodged it easily, his movements swift and precise. Ella's heart raced as she realized she couldn't hold him off forever. In a last-ditch effort, she threw the rake at him and darted past him, slipping out of the shed and running towards the street. Her only hope was to reach a neighbor's house or flag down a passing car. She sprinted down the wet driveway, her lungs burning with exertion. The intruder was close behind her, his footsteps echoing ominously in the night. Ella's eyes scanned the darkness, desperately searching for any sign of help. She spotted a car approaching and waved her arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, an elderly man, rolled down his window, confusion and concern etched on his face. Ella rushed to the window, her voice a desperate plea. "Please, help me. There's someone trying to kill me." The man's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly gestured for her to get inside. Ella jumped into the passenger seat, and the car sped away just as the intruder reached the street. As they drove to safety, Ella glanced back, her heart still pounding with adrenaline. The intruder was nowhere to be seen, but she knew he wouldn't give up easily. The car stopped at the nearest police station, and Ella poured out of it, collapsing into the arms of the officers who had been waiting for her. She recounted her harrowing escape, and the police launched a full-scale search for the intruder. Despite their efforts, he managed to evade capture once again. However, the increased police presence and heightened security measures in the area made it more difficult for him to strike. Ella and her parents were forced to move temporarily, staying in a secure location until the threat was neutralized. The experience left deep scars, both physical and emotional, but Ella's bravery and quick thinking had saved her life. Over time, the fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious vigilance. Ella learned to live with the shadows of her past, finding solace in the support of her family and the knowledge that she had survived a nightmarish ordeal. The intruder was never caught, but Ella's courage and resourcefulness ensured that she would never be a victim again. Her life had changed irrevocably, but she emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient, a survivor of a terror that would forever haunt her memories.
Next story.
Bella's journey began with a simple thrill of an impromptu road trip. She had just graduated college and was eager to taste the freedom of the open road. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the highway, and Bella felt a sense of adventure that made her heart race with excitement. As the evening turned into night, Bella realized she needed to refuel. She was in the middle of nowhere, the stretch of road flanked by dense forests on either side. Relief washed over her when she spotted the dim, flickering lights of a gas station in the distance. She pulled in, the gravel crunching under her tires as she parked beside a lone pump. The gas station was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of Bella's neck stand up. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting an unsettling glow on the cracked pavement. Bella stepped out of her car, the night air chilling her to the bone despite it being a warm summer night. She glanced around, noting the lack of other vehicles or people. Just as she began to pump gas, a figure emerged from the shadows of the station's office. It was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face that seemed to have seen too many harsh days. His eyes were cold and distant, but he forced a smile that didn't reach them. "Evening, miss. Need any help?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Bella shook her head, feeling an inexplicable urge to finish and leave as quickly as possible. "No, thank you. I'm just getting some gas." The man nodded but lingered, watching her with an intensity that made Bella's skin crawl. She hurried through the process, and when she went inside to pay, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The store was a cluttered mess of old, dusty products, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else she couldn't quite place. As Bella approached the counter, she noticed a younger man standing behind it. He had the same distant eyes as the older man but seemed slightly more approachable. "That'll be $20, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bella handed over the money, her eyes darting around the store, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Just as she was about to leave, the younger man leaned forward and spoke in a low, urgent tone. "You should get back on the road quickly. It's not safe here after dark." Bella's heart pounded in her chest. "Why? What's going on?" The man glanced towards the older man, who was now standing by the door, his eyes fixed on them. "Just trust me. Leave. Now." Bella didn't need to be told twice. She rushed out of the store, feeling the men's eyes on her back as she got into her car. She started the engine and drove off, the gas station quickly disappearing in her rearview mirror. But the sense of unease stayed with her, growing stronger with each passing mile. As she continued down the dark highway, Bella's car suddenly began to sputter. The engine roared and then died, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere. She tried to restart the car, but it was no use. Panic set in as she realized her phone had no signal. She was alone, in the dark, with no way to call for help. Bella sat in her car for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She decided to get out and see if she could figure out what was wrong with the engine. As she opened the hood, the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel made her freeze. She looked up to see a pair of headlights approaching in the distance. Relief flooded through her. Perhaps it was someone who could help. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, pulled up behind her car. The driver stepped out, and Bella's blood ran cold. It was the older man from the gas station. "Having car trouble?" he asked, his tone devoid of the previous friendliness. Bella forced a smile. "Yeah, it just died on me. Do you think you could help?" The man walked over to her, peering under the hood. "Looks like your engine overheated. You should have let it cool down before driving off so fast." Bella's heart sank. She knew she hadn't driven far enough for the engine to overheat. Something was very wrong. I didn't realize. Do you think you can fix it?" He looked at her, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "Why don't you come with me? There's a phone at the station. You can call for a tow." Bella hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her not to go with him, but she had no other option. "Okay, let me just grab my bag." She reached into her car, fumbling for her bag while trying to think of a way out. Her fingers brushed against her phone, and she quickly turned it on, hoping to get a signal. Nothing. She grabbed her bag and turned back to the man, who was now standing uncomfortably close. "Ready?" he asked, his smile sending chills down her spine. Bella nodded, following him to the truck. As she climbed in, she noticed the back seat was filled with various tools and what looked like blood-stained rags. Her pulse quickened as the man started the truck, and they drove back towards the gas station. The drive was silent, the man's eyes occasionally flicking towards Bella. She tried to stay calm, thinking of ways to escape. When they reached the gas station, Bella's heart sank further. The younger man was waiting outside, his expression unreadable. The older man got out and opened the door for Bella. "Go inside and use the phone," he instructed. Bella walked towards the store, the younger man following closely behind. She glanced at him, hoping for some sign of help, but his face remained impassive. Inside, the store seemed even darker and more oppressive than before. "Where's the phone?" Bella asked, her voice trembling. The younger man pointed to a corner of the store. "Over there." Bella moved towards the phone, but before she could reach it, she felt a sharp pain in the back of her head. The world spun, and she collapsed to the floor, darkness enveloping her. When Bella awoke, she was in a dimly lit room, her hands and feet bound. Panic surged through her as she struggled against the ropes. The room was small, with concrete walls and a single, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. She could hear muffled voices outside the door. Tears streamed down Bella's face as she realized the gravity of her situation. She was trapped, with no one knowing where she was. The door creaked open, and the older man stepped inside, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "We're going to have some fun." Bella's heart raced as he approached, a sinister grin spreading across his face. She tried to back away, but the ropes held her in place. "Please, let me go," she begged, her voice breaking. The man laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Oh, we can't do that. You see, we have a tradition here. Every so often, we get visitors like you, and we make sure they stay for a while." Bella's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. "Someone will come looking for me," she said desperately. "They'll know something's wrong." The man shook his head, his grin widening. "Out here, no one will find you. This place, it's forgotten, just like you will be." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Bella in the suffocating darkness. She sobbed, feeling utterly helpless. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days' time had lost all meaning. She was given little food and water, just enough to keep her alive. One night, Bella heard the sound of keys jangling and the door creaking open again. But this time, it was the younger man. He looked at her with something resembling pity. "Why are you doing this?" Bella asked, her voice hoarse from crying. He sighed, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "I don't have a choice. My father, he's a monster. If I don't help him, he'll kill me too." Bella's eyes widened. "You can still help me. We can both get out of here." The man shook his head. "It's not that simple, but I'll try to leave the door unlocked tonight. If you can get out and find a way to the road, maybe you can get help." Bella nodded, hope flickering in her chest for the first time. "Thank you." True to his word, that night the door was left unlocked. Bella waited until the gas station was silent before making her move. She crept out of the room, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The store was dark, the only light coming from the flickering neon sign outside. Bella moved cautiously, avoiding creaky floorboards and holding her breath. She reached the front door and slipped outside, the cool night air hitting her face like a blessing. She glanced around, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. She could see the outline of the forest and the faint glow of the highway in the distance. She ran, her legs weak but fueled by adrenaline. Branches scratched her arms and face as she pushed through the dense underbrush, the fear of being caught driving her forward. She stumbled onto the highway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. In the distance, she saw headlights approaching. She waved her arms frantically, praying the driver would stop. The car slowed down, and a middle-aged woman rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, her voice filled with concern. Bella nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, help me. They're after me." The woman quickly unlocked the door, and Bella climbed in, her body trembling. Bella's heart pounded in her chest as the woman's car sped down the highway, but just as she began to feel a sense of safety, she noticed headlights rapidly approaching from behind. The old pickup truck barreled down the road, the engine roaring like an enraged beast. Bella's pulse quickened as the old man's silhouette became clearer in the driver's seat. "Please, drive faster," Bella pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. The woman pressed down on the gas, but the truck closed the distance alarmingly fast. Before Bella could react, the truck rammed into the back of the car, sending it skidding off the road and into a ditch. Bella's head slammed against the window, stars exploding in her vision. "Run!" the woman shouted, fumbling with her seatbelt. Bella's instincts kicked in. She pushed the door open and tumbled out, her legs shaky but driven by sheer terror. She scrambled up the embankment and darted into the dense forest, the sound of the old man's laughter echoing behind her. "Run, little rabbit. You can't hide from me," he taunted, his voice cutting through the darkness like a knife. Bella's breath came in ragged gasps as she plunged deeper into the forest. Branches clawed at her skin, and the underbrush tugged at her clothes, but she pushed on, driven by the primal need to survive. She could hear the old man crashing through the woods behind her, his footsteps heavy and relentless. "You think you can escape me? I've been hunting for years. No one gets away," he bellowed, his voice closer than before. Bella's mind raced as she desperately searched for a place to hide. She spotted a fallen tree and crawled underneath it, trying to quiet her breathing. Her heart thundered in her ears as the old man's footsteps grew louder. He was so close now. She could hear him muttering to himself. Come out, wherever you are. You can't hide forever, little rabbit." Bella bit her lip to stifle a sob, tears streaming down her face. She clung to the hope that he would pass by, but her hopes were dashed when his boots appeared inches from her face. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't look down. The old man paused, his breath heavy and uneven. "I can smell your fear," he whispered, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. "It's delicious." Bella's pulse quickened, her body trembling with fear. The old man's boots lingered for a moment longer before he moved on, his footsteps fading into the distance. Bella waited, counting to 100 in her head before daring to move. When she finally crawled out from under the tree, she felt a glimmer of hope. But her relief was short-lived. As she crept through the forest, she heard the old man's voice again, this time singing a twisted lullaby. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna find you in the dark, unheard." Bella's panic surged anew. She ran blindly, her vision blurred by tears. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her body battered and bruised, but she kept moving, driven by the knowledge that to stop was to die. She burst into a small clearing, her breath hitching as she saw a dilapidated cabin. Desperation overrode caution as she sprinted towards it, praying it offered some semblance of safety. She threw open the door and slammed it behind her, her eyes scanning the dark interior. The cabin was empty, save for a few broken pieces of furniture and a rotting mattress. Bella rushed to the nearest window, peering out into the darkness. The old man was nowhere in sight, but she knew he wasn't far behind. She needed to find a place to hide. She spotted a trapdoor in the corner of the room and hurried over, pulling it open to reveal a dank cellar. Without hesitation, she climbed down, closing the door above her just as she heard the old man's footsteps outside the cabin. "Come on out, little rabbit. I know you're in there," he called, his voice sickeningly sweet. "You can't hide from me." Bella crouched in the darkness, her breath coming in shallow, silent gasps. She heard the cabin door creak open and the old man's footsteps as he entered. He moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the hunt. "I can hear your heartbeat, it's like a drum, calling me to you." Bella pressed a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. She could hear him moving around the cabin, his footsteps methodical and unhurried. He was toying with her, relishing her fear. Suddenly, the trapdoor was yanked open, and the old man's face appeared, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight. His eyes gleamed with triumph. "There you are," he said, reaching down to grab her. Bella screamed and kicked, her foot connecting with his face. He grunted in pain, momentarily losing his grip. Seizing the opportunity, Bella scrambled out of the cellar and bolted for the door. She didn't look back, her only thought to get as far away as possible. She burst out of the cabin and into the forest, the old man's enraged shouts echoing behind her. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. She stumbled upon a river, its swift current glistening in the moonlight. With no other option, Bella waded into the icy water, gasping as the cold bit into her skin. She let the current carry her downstream, hoping it would mask her scent and sound. She floated for what felt like an eternity, her body numb and exhausted. Finally, the river deposited her on a rocky shore. Bella crawled out, shivering uncontrollably. She forced herself to her feet, knowing she couldn't stop yet. She staggered into the woods, each step a monumental effort. As dawn began to break, Bella spotted a road in the distance. Summoning the last of her strength, she stumbled towards it, praying for a passing car. She collapsed onto the asphalt, her vision blurring. A car screeched to a halt beside her, and she felt hands lifting her, heard voices filled with concern. Bella's consciousness slipped away. The last thing she heard was the distant howl of the old man's rage. When Bella awoke, she was in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nose. A nurse smiled down at her. "You're safe now," she said gently. "The police are on their way." Bella nodded weakly, relief flooding through her. She had survived, but she knew the nightmares would follow her, the old man's twisted voice forever echoing in her mind.
Next story.
Monica Hill had seen her share of darkness, but nothing could have prepared her for the abyss that lay ahead in the Raven case. When she was first briefed on the serial killings, she immediately sensed this was different, more personal, more sinister. The killer had already claimed 5 young women, each death more horrifying than the last. The pressure to catch him before he struck again was immense, and as the youngest agent in the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, Monica was determined to prove herself. What began as a professional challenge soon became an obsession. The first victim, Alyssa Kent, was a vibrant 25-year-old teacher, beloved by her students and colleagues. Her body was found in the basement of an abandoned building, displayed with a twisted sense of reverence. The precision of the incisions, the arrangement of her limbs, suggested a ritualistic aspect to the killing. Her heart had been removed, replaced by a black raven's feather. There were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. It was as if she had known her killer and gone with him willingly. Alyssa's friends and family were devastated, but none could offer any leads. She had no known enemies, no troubled past. The only clue was a series of encrypted messages found on her phone, sent from a burner number. One of the messages, from a contact identified as Elliot Gray, read, "I understand you in ways no one else does. You have a way of seeing the world that resonates with me deeply. You're not alone. Alyssa, I'm here for you." The burner phone was untraceable, leaving Monica with few leads to follow. The second victim, Emily Clark, a 24-year-old aspiring artist, was found under similar circumstances. Described as kind and gentle, she had been dating someone new, Mark Davenport, who quickly became a suspect. Despite his visible distress, Mark's alibi was solid. He had been out of town the weekend Emily was killed. Monica couldn't shake the feeling he was hiding something, but a deeper background check turned up nothing. Mark was clean, almost too clean. Monica discovered that Emily had been corresponding with a mysterious figure online. The chats were deleted, but fragments recovered suggested Emily had confided in someone about her insecurities, fears, and dreams. This person had wormed their way into Emily's life, earning her trust before betraying it. The third victim, Sarah Whitman, a 23-year-old nursing student, had been abducted from her college campus. Outgoing and social, Sarah had become withdrawn in the weeks leading up to her death, spending more time alone. Monica found a journal in Sarah's apartment, filled with cryptic entries about a man she had met at a local coffee shop. "He sees me," one entry read. "It's like he knows everything about me." The coffee shop became a focal point of the investigation, but the baristas and regulars couldn't recall anyone unusual. Security footage showed Sarah meeting with a man whose face was obscured by a baseball cap. They sat together for hours, deep in conversation. Monica's gut told her this man was important, but once again, the trail went cold. The fourth victim, Hannah Reyes, a 26-year-old software engineer, was found in her apartment. Her death was the most brutal of them all. The crime scene was chaotic, indicating a violent struggle. Unlike the other victims, Hannah had fought back, and her apartment was left in disarray. Despite this, no discernible clues emerged from the scene. Hannah's colleagues described her as brilliant but reclusive. She had been working on a project that could revolutionize cybersecurity, something she was protective of. Her co-workers speculated that someone might have wanted to steal her work, but there was no evidence of a break-in or anything stolen. Monica discovered Hannah had recently joined a dating app. where she had been messaging someone who shared her passion for technology. The conversations were intense and almost philosophical. Monica suspected the killer had used this connection to manipulate Hannah. As Monica pieced together the victims' lives, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each woman had been involved with someone new, someone who had appeared out of nowhere and quickly gained their trust. The killer was intelligent, methodical, and patient, selecting his victims carefully and learning everything he could about them before striking. The fifth victim, Jessica Moore, a 27-year-old attorney, was found in her car, mutilated beyond recognition. Known for her tenacity and sharp mind, Jessica had become paranoid in the weeks before her death, convinced someone was watching her. She had installed security cameras in her home and hired a private investigator, but nothing came of it. Footage from the night of her death showed her driving alone, her face pale and drawn. The private investigator, Alan Griggs, became a person of interest. He admitted to following Jessica on several occasions, but insisted it was part of his job. His record showed he was trailing another suspect the night Jessica was killed, but Monica wasn't convinced. Griggs, a former cop with a checkered past, dismissed from the force for excessive force and known for bending the rules, had no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Monica's frustration grew with each dead end. The killer was always one step ahead, leaving just enough clues to taunt her but not enough to catch him. The victims' lives had been carefully dismantled, their trust exploited. The killer was a master manipulator, understanding the human psyche all too well. Monica focused on a few key suspects: Mark Davenport, who seemed too perfect; Alan Griggs, with his dark past; Stephen Harris, a barrister with a troubling history; and Ethan Brooks, a high school teacher with a seemingly spotless record. Each had potential, but none had direct evidence linking them to the crimes. Then, one evening, Monica received an anonymous tip. The distorted voice on the line said, "You're looking in the wrong place. The answer is closer than you think." Before she could ask more, the line went dead. The tip left her rattled. What did it mean? Who was the caller? Was it the killer playing with her, or someone who genuinely wanted to help? Monica decided to follow the lead, even though it was risky. She reviewed the case files again, focusing on the suspects she had already interviewed. Something nagged at her, something she had overlooked. She decided to start with Ethan Brooks. There was something about him that didn't add up. Ethan lived in a modest apartment not far from where the last victim was found. He had no close friends or family, and his life appeared open. But Monica discovered Ethan had been married once, years ago. His ex-wife, Laura, had filed for divorce citing emotional abuse and manipulation, though there were no criminal charges. The divorce had been messy, with Laura eventually disappearing off the grid. It was a small detail, but it gnawed at Monica. She decided to visit Ethan one last time, under the pretense of a routine follow-up. As she approached his apartment, a sense of dread settled over her. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. She knocked on the door, her hand hovering near her gun, ready for anything. Ethan answered, his expression calm, almost friendly. "Agent Hill," he said smoothly. "Back again?" Monica forced a smile. "Just a few more questions, if you don't mind." Ethan stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The apartment was clean, orderly, almost sterile, just as it had been during her last visit. But this time, Monica noticed something different. The atmosphere felt off, as if the air itself was charged with a sinister energy. As Monica began her questioning, her mind raced. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. And then she saw it, a small black feather, partially hidden under a stack of papers on the coffee table. Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan followed her gaze and smiled. I found it outside. Thought it was interesting." Monica felt a chill run down her spine. Interesting, she echoed, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Ethan's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Is something wrong, Agent Hill? Monica's hand moved to her gun, but before she could draw it, Ethan lunged at her. The impact sent her crashing into the coffee table, her vision going black for a moment. When she regained consciousness, she was on the floor, Ethan standing over her, a knife gleaming in his hand. You shouldn't have come here, he said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. But now that you have, I can't let you leave. Monica's mind raced. She needed to escape, but her body felt heavy, sluggish. She tried to reach for her gun, but Ethan kicked it away, his foot connecting with her ribs in a sickening crunch. Pain shot through her, but she bit back a scream, knowing it would only make things worse. Ethan knelt beside her, his cold eyes boring into hers. You were so close, he murmured, almost wistfully. But you missed the most important detail. Monica struggled to focus, her thoughts jumbled and incoherent. Why? She managed to gasp. Ethan tilted his head, considering her question. Because I could, he said simply. Because they trusted me, and I made them feel special. They all wanted something, love, understanding, validation, and I gave it to them. Just before I took it away. Monica felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just about killing, it was about control, breaking his victims piece by piece. And now she was next. In a desperate move, Monica reached for a shard of broken glass from the coffee table. With a swift motion, she drove it into Ethan's leg. He screamed, his grip on the knife faltering. She seized the moment to scramble away, her vision blurring with pain. The apartment door burst open, and her partner, Jameson, stormed in, gun drawn. FBI, drop the knife, he ordered. Ethan hesitated for a heartbeat, then dropped the knife, his face a mask of cold resignation. Monica, bruised and battered, scrambled to her feet as Jameson handcuffed Ethan. The apartment was soon swarming with forensic teams and officers, but Monica's focus remained on Ethan. Hours later, Ethan was in an interrogation room, his demeanor eerily calm as he awaited questioning. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows on the walls. Monica and Jameson entered, their expressions a mix of fatigue and resolve. Ethan sat at the table, his hands folded in front of him. Monica began, "We're going to need you to explain everything. Why did you do it? How did you pick your victims? Where did you take them?" Ethan's eyes glinted with a chilling intensity. He leaned forward, his voice steady but dripping with a cold, unsettling calm. "It all started with a simple idea," he began, his tone almost conversational. "I wanted to understand the deepest fears and desires of those around me. I observed, learned, and manipulated." He paused, letting the silence stretch before continuing. "Each of my victims had something in common, a longing for connection, for someone to truly understand them. I found them in their moments of vulnerability. Alyssa, with her craving for empathy and validation, was easy. I reached out with messages that spoke to her deepest insecurities." Ethan's gaze hardened as he spoke about each victim, his words punctuated by disturbing detail. Emily was an artist, desperate for someone to appreciate her talent and her soul. I pretended to be a kindred spirit, someone who saw the beauty she was afraid no one else could. I manipulated her through our online conversations, making her believe that I was the one who truly understood her. He leaned back, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. Sarah was different. She was outgoing, surrounded by friends, but secretly yearning for something more intimate. I approached her at the coffee shop, feigning interest in her passions. I wormed my way into her life, feeding her fears and desires until she trusted me completely. Ethan's expression grew darker as he described Hannah. Hannah was driven by her work, obsessed with her projects. She was a challenge because she was so focused, so isolated. I used her need for intellectual stimulation against her. I pretended to be someone who shared her enthusiasm for technology, drawing her into my web before striking. He shifted his gaze to Monica, his eyes cold and unfeeling. Jessica was the hardest. Her paranoia made her cautious, and I had to be very careful with her. I played on her fears, convincing her that she was being watched, that she was in danger. I made sure she felt that she had no one else to turn to before I ended her life. Ethan's voice was now barely above a whisper, but the room seemed to close in around them. I chose places that made them feel safe or familiar, locations that would lull them into a false sense of security. I studied their habits, their routines. Every detail was calculated, every move deliberate. Monica shivered, unable to shake the feeling of being trapped in Ethan's web of manipulation. And the feathers? What was the significance? Ethan's lips curled into a sinister smile. The raven's feather was a symbol. To me, it represented the moment I took away their freedom, their life. It was a mark of my control, a way to remind them of who had power over them, even in death. As Ethan finished his chilling confession, Monica felt the full weight of his depravity. His calculated explanations painted a disturbing portrait of control and obsession. It was never really about them, Ethan said softly. It was about proving I could control their lives. With Ethan finally in custody, Monica and Jameson left the interrogation room, the air heavy with a sense of grim finality. The trial that followed was a media frenzy, but for Monica, the victory was bittersweet. The darkness of the Raven's crimes had left its mark on her, a shadow that would linger long after the case was closed. As Monica sat alone in her apartment, she stared at the raven feather she had kept as evidence. The room was quiet, but the weight of what she had endured felt palpable. Though justice had been served, the haunting memories of the raven would forever remain a part of her, a reminder of the darkness she had faced and the toll it had taken on her soul. Monica closed her eyes, trying to find peace amidst the shadows, knowing that some scars never fully heal. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe for more captivating and eerie tales.
Next story.
Kevin was a brilliant programmer, the kind of genius who could bend code to his will, turning lines of text into intricate algorithms that could do almost anything. He wasn't just talented, he was obsessed. The digital world was his playground, and the dark web was his domain. Kevin made a living doing freelance work in the shadows, creating secure systems for those who needed them, designing and selling hacking tools, and occasionally engaging in some morally ambiguous activities. His skills were unmatched, and his services were in demand. But Kevin wasn't content. He wanted more, something darker, more thrilling. One night, as Kevin delved deeper into the dark web, he found himself intrigued by the idea of exploring the deep web. It was a place known for being a digital abyss, a realm where the most illicit of activities took place. The challenge of accessing it, of outsmarting the layers of security and encryption, was too enticing to resist. He spent weeks preparing, learning about Tor networks, cryptographic methods, and various anonymization techniques. Finally, he felt ready. Kevin accessed the deep web using a combination of Tor and a highly secure VPN he had designed himself, ensuring his anonymity was airtight. The deep web was a chaotic expanse, a place where anything could be bought or sold if one knew where to look. Among the usual assortment of illegal goods, drugs, stolen data, counterfeit documents, Kevin stumbled upon a site that chilled him to the bone, a marketplace for murder. It was a grim, highly organized platform that advertised different types of hits, each with its own price tag. The site was disturbingly professional, with services ranging from basic elimination to more complex accidents or disappearances. Prices varied depending on the target's profile and the method requested. There were options for staging suicides, car accidents, or even creating elaborate scenarios to ensure no trace of foul play was detected. Kevin found himself morbidly fascinated. The site had a section dedicated to testimonials, all anonymized, of course. They read like chilling success stories, complete with reviews and ratings. Kevin felt a strange thrill reading about these real-life horrors, the kind of rush that came from knowing he was treading in the darkest depths of humanity. One particular service caught his eye, the Ultimate Game. It was a hit service with a twist. The client could hire a hitman to hunt them down. The idea was to create the most thrilling, adrenaline-pumping experience imaginable, a real-life game of cat and mouse with the ultimate stakes. The price was exorbitant, but Kevin was intrigued. He had always been an adventurous spirit, craving the next big thrill, the next adrenaline rush. This was it, the ultimate challenge, the perfect way to test his skills, his intellect, and his nerve. After much deliberation, Kevin decided to go through with it. He contacted the service, using the encrypted messaging system provided by the site. The instructions were precise and chilling. He was to wire a substantial amount of cryptocurrency to a designated account, after which the game would begin. The service assured complete confidentiality and professionalism. The hitman would have no personal vendetta, just a job to do. Once the transaction was confirmed, Kevin received a cryptic message. The game begins now. Good luck. Kevin felt a thrill of excitement and fear. He had just put a price on his own head, hired a professional killer to hunt him down. The reality of what he'd done hit him like a cold wave. He was now a target, his life at the mercy of a faceless assassin. But Kevin was prepared, or so he thought. He had planned meticulously, setting up escape routes, safe houses, and an elaborate system of false leads to throw the hitman off his trail. The first few days were quiet, almost anticlimactic. Kevin stayed low, moving from place to place, using disposable phones and paying for everything in cash. He felt confident, even cocky, believing he could outsmart the hitman. But then, strange things started happening. He noticed a black sedan tailing him at a distance. A shadowy figure seemed to lurk outside the cafes he frequented, always just out of sight. Kevin's nerves began to fray. The game was becoming real, too real. One night, while driving a borrowed car from a friend, Kevin decided to leave the city and head into the countryside. He hoped to find some respite, a place to think clearly. He found a small, run-down motel by the highway, a place where he thought he could lay low for a while. The night was thick with an oppressive silence, the kind that made every creak and rustle seem louder. Kevin checked into a room, trying to calm his racing heart. He knew the hitman was close, too close. As he lay on the bed, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, Kevin heard a soft knock on the door. His heart stopped. He hadn't ordered any room service, hadn't spoken to anyone. His mind raced, considering his options. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Kevin's pulse quickened. He quietly got up, grabbed his backpack, and headed towards the window. Just as he was about to open it, the door burst open. Kevin glanced back to see a masked figure, gun drawn, stepping into the room. Without thinking, Kevin jumped through the window, landing awkwardly on the ground below. Pain shot through his leg, but adrenaline propelled him forward. He sprinted to the car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. As he sped away, he glanced in the rearview mirror to see the hitman emerging from the motel, calmly watching him drive off. Kevin's mind raced. How had the hitman found him? He had been so careful, so thorough in covering his tracks. Then it hit him, the car. The car was the common denominator, the one thing that connected all his movements. Kevin drove aimlessly, his mind a whirl of panic and fear. He had to ditch the car, but where? And how could he stay ahead of a professional killer? He decided to head towards a remote mountain area he knew from a hiking trip years ago. It was isolated, rugged, the perfect place to hide. As he drove, Kevin checked the car for any tracking devices, tearing through the seats, the dashboard, even the engine compartment. He found nothing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the hitman was still close, too close. He reached the mountains as dawn broke, the sky a wash of grey and pink. Kevin abandoned the car on a dirt road, grabbing only the essentials from his backpack: some food, water, a flashlight, and a map. He started up a trail, hoping to lose himself in the dense forest. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Kevin's breath came in ragged gasps, his body aching from the night's ordeals. He walked for hours, the forest closing in around him, the trees like silent sentinels watching his every move. Kevin's paranoia grew with each step. Every snap of a twig, every flutter of a bird made his heart leap. He felt hunted, like prey, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a hawk. As night fell, Kevin found a small cave and decided to rest. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. He needed a plan, a way to turn the tables. The night was pitch black, the cave cold and damp. Kevin huddled against the wall, trying to think. He remembered something from his dark web dealings, a jammer device he had once helped develop, designed to disrupt tracking signals. It was a long shot, but if he could get to a place with tools and equipment, he might be able to build one. The nearest town was miles away, but it was his only hope. At dawn, Kevin set out again, heading towards the town. The journey was grueling, his body protesting with every step. He hadn't eaten or slept properly in days, and the fear was like a constant weight on his chest. As he neared the town, Kevin knew he had to be cautious. The hitman could be anywhere, waiting for him to slip up. He kept to the back alleys, moving like a shadow, avoiding the main roads. He found a small electronics store and slipped inside, using cash to buy the components he needed. The store clerk gave him a curious look, but Kevin ignored it, his mind focused on the task at hand. He found a secluded spot behind an old warehouse and began assembling the jammer. His hands shook with exhaustion and fear, but he managed to piece it together. As he activated the device, a wave of relief washed over him. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. But Kevin's relief was short-lived. As he made his way back towards the forest, he felt eyes on him. He turned, his heart pounding, and saw the hitman standing at the end of the alley, watching him with cold, calculating eyes. Kevin's blood ran cold. How had the hitman found him? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The hitman hadn't been tracking him. He had been watching him, following his every move, staying just out of sight, like a shadow. Panic surged through Kevin. He turned and ran, his mind a blur of terror and confusion. He darted through the alleys, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the hitman's footsteps behind him, methodical, unhurried. Kevin's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. He spotted a construction site up ahead and veered towards it, hoping to lose the hitman in the maze of machinery and half-built structures. Kevin ducked behind a stack of metal beams, his heart pounding so loud he was sure the hitman could hear it. He peered around the corner, but the site was eerily quiet. He had lost sight of the hitman. Kevin's mind raced. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed to keep moving, to find a way out of this nightmare. As he crept through the construction site, Kevin felt a sudden, sharp pain in his shoulder. He gasped, stumbling forward. He looked down and saw a tranquilizer dart sticking out of his arm. The world began to spin, his vision blurring. Kevin tried to run, but his legs felt like lead. He collapsed to the ground, his body heavy and unresponsive. As darkness closed in, the last thing he saw was the hitman standing over him, a cold, emotionless look in his eyes. Kevin awoke in a dimly lit room, his head throbbing. He tried to move, but his arms and legs were bound to a chair. Panic surged through him as he looked around, trying to get his bearings. The room was bare, the walls concrete, the air cold and damp. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows on the floor. The hitman stood in front of him, silent and unmoving. Kevin felt a wave of fear and helplessness wash over him. He was trapped, at the mercy of a cold-blooded killer. The hitman stepped forward, his face still hidden behind a mask. He spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You wanted a game," the hitman said, his tone devoid of emotion. "But games have rules, and you've broken them." Kevin's mind raced, trying to understand what the hitman meant. He had hired the hitman, set the rules. How could he have broken them? "You tried to interfere," the hitman continued. "To disrupt the game. That's not allowed." Kevin realized with a sinking feeling that the jammer must have been the problem. He had tried to disrupt the tracking signals to gain an advantage. But the hitman hadn't been using technology to track him. He had been watching, following, always one step ahead. Fear gripped Kevin as the hitman reached into his coat and pulled out a syringe. He stepped closer, and Kevin struggled against the bonds, his mind a whirl of terror. He had played a dangerous game, and now he was at the mercy of a professional killer, with no way out. The hitman injected the syringe into Kevin's arm, the cold liquid spreading through his veins. Kevin felt his body go numb, his vision blurring. The hitman leaned in close, his voice a whisper. "This is the end of the game, Kevin," he said. "You wanted to test yourself, to see if you could survive. But in the end, you were just another target." As Kevin's consciousness faded, he felt a crushing sense of despair. He had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and now he was about to pay the ultimate price. The world went dark, and Kevin knew no more. When Kevin woke up again, he found himself lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV. He blinked, trying to clear his foggy mind. He was alive. Somehow, he had survived. A nurse entered the room, and Kevin tried to speak, but his throat was dry and sore. The nurse gave him a glass of water and smiled. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "They found you in an abandoned warehouse, barely breathing. You were hypothermic, and there were signs of sedative overdose. But you're going to be okay." Kevin's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. The last thing he remembered was the hitman injecting him, and then nothing. How had he ended up here, and why was he still alive? The nurse seemed to sense his confusion. "The police are looking into it," she said. "But they haven't found any leads. Whoever did this to you was very careful." Lying in the hospital bed, Kevin felt the weight of his decision settle over him. The thrill-seeking that had driven him to hire a hitman to hunt him had turned into a nightmare beyond his control. The hitman had spared him, but the encounter had left Kevin changed, haunted by the shadows of his own making. The police found no leads, leaving Kevin with the unsettling realization that the hitman was still out there, possibly watching, waiting. Kevin had escaped with his life, but the experience had etched deep scars into his psyche. He knew he could never return to his old life, nor shake the feeling that the game was still being played, the rules now unknown to him. As Kevin lay in the sterile hospital room, he knew he had been given a second chance, but it came with a price. The fear and uncertainty were now a part of him, a chilling reminder that the line between thrill and terror is razor thin. He would have to live with the haunting question: was he truly free, or was this just another twist in the game orchestrated by the hitman? The answer, Kevin realized, might be something he'd never know, leaving him forever looking over his shoulder in fear. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. As we follow Kevin's harrowing journey, we're reminded that curiosity can lead us down dangerous paths, and some games are better left unplayed. Remember, always tread carefully and make smart choices. Good night, stay safe, and be mindful of the shadows that may be watching.